What's going on at Florida? Just took an L to Vanderbilt, 31-24. Now, I was at Vanderbilt, if that means anything to you. But we need to take a full assessment of this Florida program because it's not acceptable to lose to Vanderbilt ever. And that's not to knock Vanderbilt. I'm actually a Clark Lee stan. I think they're actually going to be okay in the years to come if they give him enough time. But it's not a Vanderbilt video. We got to focus on Florida right now and take an honest view of what this program is right now. Now, here's my first question to you, because I know you're frustrated about Vanderbilt. I'd be frustrated about the Vanderbilt loss too. Like that's never okay. But here's my question: do you, in your heart of hearts, believe that Vanderbilt is a better program than you are at Florida? Like, if you played 10 times, would you expect Vanderbilt to win the majority of those games? I'll give you a chance to answer. I'm assuming you probably said no. And if you didn't say no, well, then I would ask you to look at the roster. Florida is a better program than Vanderbilt from a talent perspective. So you say, well, why did we lose yesterday? And I would imagine there's some frustration with the head man, Billy Napier. That's okay. It's the head coach. It's going to take the majority of the praise and the brunt of the criticism, regardless of what happens for your football team. But I would just say this: Billy Napier inherited the house fire that Florida football is. And it hasn't been extremely visible every single week. They actually played a really strong brand of football the last few weeks leading into this game. But the issues at Florida are two things. One is depth. Billy Napier's going to recruit. We'll talk about that in a second. One is depth. The kitchen is not fully stocked. The second is culture, which I think showed itself most yesterday against Vanderbilt. It's cold. You got to go on the road. Second to last game of the regular season. You got to play Vanderbilt. Like, in every sense of the word, that game had the opportunity to feel like a chore. So no one's blaming Florida. But the great teams, the teams that end up playing for, some substantial games later in the year, early January, late December kind of games, they just handle business. They don't allow the external to impact their level of play. And that was not what we saw from Florida yesterday. We saw exactly like I said, late in the year, it's cold, you got to travel to go play at a stadium against Vanderbilt that's not really that full, to be honest with you. Like, they lent themselves to the external. So that's the bad news. Now, the good news is Billy Napier is taking the appropriate measures in year one to get that fixed. The house is on fire. It was already on fire before he got there. He's steady, trying to rebuild and put out those fires. Don't believe me? Brenton Cox, one of the best defensive players on your team. He was a guy that I promise you would have made an impact yesterday against Vanderbilt. Billy Napier says, nope, he's off the team. I'm assuming there was something baked into that with he was not good for the culture. Now, again, I don't know Brenton Cox from anybody else, but Billy Napier knows his program, knows his locker room, and decided to cut out a very talented player for the betterment of the overall operation. Tells me the guy's focused on culture. He cares about what the internal is. He's not just about what can you do for me on the field. He understands the health of the organization is very much predicated as well on the internal culture and that locker room. So what you saw yesterday against Vanderbilt, yeah, it's awful. It's horrific. To the same token, you have to understand this is a process, and you're continuing to try and flush out the bad and get in the good. So this time next year, you don't have the same kind of conversation, and the culture is strong enough to be attentive in November games, all right? Second piece of that, like we said, depth. It's a big word in college football. We know how you supplement depth. Well, one is transfer portal, and they've done some of that so far. I'd expect there's some transfer portal movement in Gainesville, both in and out, when that time comes. But talking about recruiting, currently a top 10 class in the 2023 On3 consensus team recruiting rankings at the time of this being recorded. So what does that tell you? Billy Napier and company, they're hitting the road. They're not wasting any time. They're trying to get talent into the building. And I tell you what, to have a top 10 class right now with a program that's not going to play for a New Year's Six Bowl, that's not going to compete for an SEC title this year at least, they're buying into the vision. Billy Napier is selling the vision. He's selling what Florida can be, what Florida will be, and guys are buying in. Recruits are saying, yes, we're in for that. We don't see it now, but we will see it. We've seen what Florida can be. Also, resources. Billy Napier showed up and said, I need this, this, and this from a resource perspective. We've all seen the team photo of how many individuals there are that are in polos, that are a part of the operation when it comes to recruiting for Florida. Like, it's going to take some time. And what happened yesterday is an eyesore. What happened yesterday is never acceptable. Vanderbilt is a program that I think is headed the right direction, but Florida just has much more, and they should have beat Vanderbilt. Like, there's no other way to say that. I'm not excusing this, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page and in agreement. The loss yesterday that Florida suffered was inherited from what Florida was previously. Billy Napier is going to get this thing headed the right direction. I fully believe that. And he's taken the appropriate measures with what he's done, cutting out bad parts of that culture and hitting the recruiting trail hard. That is the lifeblood of college football. So if you're upset, I understand. Stay down for the come up. It's going to be all right. I'm JD Piquel. This has been The Hard Count. We appreciate you tuning in. If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, we would love to have y'all somewhere in the neighborhood of, I believe it was 500 Florida subs in the last week or so. We'd love to have y'all at the party if you haven't yet joined. And if you have, thanks for being here. We're going to keep on rolling, all right? So with that being said, we're going to keep the party rolling, and we will see y'all next time. Hey, y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also, be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.